From the KSL Broadcast House, this is Sunday Edition with Doug Wright.
And good morning and welcome to Sunday Edition. This week we're sitting down with Utah Senator Mitt Romney, who's been very busy traveling throughout the state of Utah, meeting with our leaders. And Senator Romney is right here in studio with us right now. So good to have you here, Senator. Always a pleasure.
Thanks, Doug. Good to be with you again.
Well, let's talk about your excursions through Utah. This is a working retreat, as it were, from Washington, D.C. Where have you been and what have you been talking about?
Well, I spent some time talking to the legislature, and, I spoke to the Republican caucus and the Democratic caucus, both in the House and the Senate, let them know what we're doing. And, of course, my job is to listen to the Utah legislature and learn what things they need from the federal government, what their priorities are. But I've also met with folks on our Wildfire Commission. Wildfire Commission established last year to say, how can we rethink how we fight these fires and keep them from becoming conflagration? Met with folks with regards to the Great Salt Lake and the kinds of actions that might be needed to make sure that we save the lake. And then another group looking at the Colorado and how we make sure that we get enough water into the Colorado, but also what the deal is among the 6 states that draw water from the Colorado. So far, 5 of the 6 states have come to an agreement as to what we're going to deal with, how we're going to deal with the drought. But old California is hanging out there and doesn't want to agree. Yeah. So those are some of the things. And then, of course, I get the chance to meet with people across the state.
Senator, this week, earlier in the week, President Biden had visited Ukraine and also made a major speech from Poland. And I have to tell you, I watched that speech and I was really quite touched. It was on the 1-year anniversary of Putin's invasion of Russia. I seem to recall somebody back in 2012 saying that Russia was the greatest geopolitical threat in the world and was kind of raised eyebrows all over the place. Let's talk about where we stand right now with Russia, and how did you feel about the president's comments as he was speaking in Poland?
You know, there's a lot I disagree with President Biden on. All the spending he did coming into office has thrown us into inflation, and I'm critical of the president a lot. But I thought his trip to Kyiv in Ukraine and also in Poland was courageous, admirable. I'm glad he did it. He made it very clear to Russia and the Russian people that we're in to stay and that we want to be successful and win. You don't want to be in a setting where one nation has invaded another in an unprovoked way and then show any wobble in your commitment. And so he made it very clear that we're there and we're going to help the people maintain their freedom. The remarkable thing is we're not shedding blood there. The Ukrainian people are fighting this battle on their own, and we're providing them with the arms they need to be able to put up a good fight. But they're outmatched. The Russian military is much, much larger. But it's really remarkable to see how courageous they are. And I was proud of our president standing for the American people and our commitment to liberty.
We have a little bit of that speech that we'd like to share with our viewers this morning.
1 year into this war, Putin no longer doubts the strength of our coalition. But he still doubts our conviction. He doubts our staying power. He doubts our continued support for Ukraine. He doubts whether NATO can remain unified. But there should be no doubt. Our support for Ukraine will not waver. NATO will not be divided, and we will not tire.
As far as the resolve within our country, the president, this was almost one of those great old-time speeches where, we are going to stand here. Is there the resolve in the Congress? Is there resolve, in your opinion, in the nation, Senator, to stand by Ukraine? Because the president implied that we'll be there as long as it takes.
Well, I think everyone recognizes that a president can make that commitment for himself. He probably can't do it for the next 25 years. But I don't think you want to show any distance between ourselves and our allies and our commitment to Ukraine on a public forum. We can have those discussions privately as to what negotiations might be undertaken, what the prospects are for eliminating this threat to Ukraine, to Moldova, and to other nations. But I think the president's wise to say what he did. And the reality is that our allies are united, and even among our caucus in Washington, Republicans to the majority, as well as Democrats, support providing arms to Ukraine to allow it to defend itself. No one is suggesting that we ought to go fight the war for the Ukrainians, that we ought to do what we did in Afghanistan or what we did in Iraq, excuse me. That's not going to happen. But helping them defend themselves is something I think there's pretty solid support for. But recognize, in the world of politics, anything the Democrat is for, a bunch of Republicans are going to be against automatically, and vice versa. And there's that going on. I think it's unfortunate in matters of foreign policy, and when one nation has brutally, in an unprovoked way, attacked another, we stand with the country of freedom.
China, my whole life, Senator, and yours too, I'm sure, it seems like everything is focused on the Soviet Union when you and I were growing up, but then also communist China. And we've had our own little issues with China lately. The weird, mysterious balloon that was just cruising across the country, other things. What are your thoughts on that, and how we have handled that, and what do you believe will be the repercussions with China and international repercussions?
Well, I do believe that China now represents the greatest long-term challenge to the United States. It is a competitor and adversary in some respects, not militarily at this stage, but they're clearly building a military to surpass ours, to have the capacity to overwhelm ours if they wanted to. It's not something we're going to allow. Their economy is obviously strong. They're a very vibrant, aggressive nation. And they represent the greatest threat to us going forward. Russia in the past, now China. And, you know, the balloon over this country, I know a number of people get very excited about that, but it flew over the country at about 6 miles above sea level. Satellites are flying over our country all the time. They're 60 miles above sea level. So, and they're taking pictures, so it's not like everything on this country is hidden from the Chinese. We have tens of thousands of Chinese nationals that go to school here and so forth, so we're not a closed society, but they made a grave error in flying a balloon across the country, and it got a lot of people upset, as it should have. And we shot it down, and I'm glad we did.
I was going to ask about that. Was that the appropriate action to take, or was it just drama?
Well, I think is absolutely necessary to take. I think the current read is that China had sent a balloon over Guam and Hawaii. It blew a bit off course. It looked like they could bring it over continental United States. They decided to do that. They did bring it over the country. They went over some of our military bases. We tried to hide things from the cameras. And once it got across the country and we could shoot it down and see what they had and what they were using and get their technology, we did. They flew in places they shouldn't be against international law. We had every right to take it down, and we did. And not taking it down would send a message, which is, oh, America is frightened. Oh, my goodness, you have a nuclear weapon. We won't do anything to upset you. Look, we have nuclear weapons, too. We're the strongest nation on the planet. And just because someone else wants to flex their muscles and maybe make us frightened, we're not going to cower in fear. We're going to take the action that we need to protect our interests.
I've wondered what in the world their strategy was, or what their purpose was for flying this balloon with they compared it to like 3 times the size of school bus.
Yeah.
And just floated and drifted over the United States. What in the world were they trying to do?
You know, someone over there wasn't thinking. You know that? I mean, it's like, you know, we're going to see the balloon, all right? We're going to see this thing floating. It had a superstructure about 90 feet attached to it and was taking, I'm sure, video and pictures and so forth, probably trying to intercept communications as well, learning what our telecommunications system was doing. I mean, all the things that a nation wants to learn about someone who they might obviously be in conflict with. That's what they were doing. We'll get a much better read of that when we take a look at what they were carrying.
Yeah. How is this going to affect with the China Grand Strategy legislation and how we move forward?
Well, I think we have to recognize that China is an adversary economically, geopolitically, militarily. They have a strategy to dominate the world by 2049. It used to seem like way, way, way off, but they're moving along, and they're showing that they're on track to do that. And so we have to develop a comprehensive strategy as well. Everything from who's going to get visas to come here from China, which schools they're going to go to, which programs they're going to be in, Confucius Institutes that have been set up in colleges. It's like, wait a second, what are they doing? How many of those are we going to allow? What kind of military equipment are we going to build to potentially keep China at bay and protect our homeland? How are we going to deal with their economic might as they dominate certain markets and price on a predatory basis, driving our competitors out of business? Is that allowed or not? We're going to keep them allow them into our market scot-free, or say, no, 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 no. If you're doing those bad things, we won't let you in. Those are the kinds of things we have to develop, and it's about time. But Senator Menendez, the Democrat chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, and I got a bill passed to call on our government to develop a comprehensive strategy to combat the aggressiveness that China might someday decide to pursue.
Speaking of dates that used to seem a long way off, there's a date that everybody, including you, are talking about right now, and it's 2034. When we come back, can we talk about that magic date?
Absolutely.
All right, that's coming up. More with Senator Romney when we come back to Sunday Edition. Stay with us. And welcome back. A continuing conversation with Senator Mitt Romney. And again, Senator, it's great to have you here. I threw out a date that I've been reading about, and you have been focused on it, and it's 2034. And that is the date, if I'm understanding correctly, if we do not do something, the Social Security just kind of drops off the edge of the world.
Yeah, as of that date, the so-called Social Security Trust Fund has been fully expended, and under the law, Social Security is cut by 24% at that point. Now, I'm sure Congress will act to make sure it does not get cut by 24%, but who knows what would happen at that point? That's down the road. So there are a number of senators, myself, along with some Democrats, that want to put in place some rescue committees, one for Social Security, one for disability, one for Medicare, one for the Highway Trust Fund, to say, let's come together and make sure that we put these programs on a solvent path forever. No more worry about those programs getting cut or eliminated in some way. So that's what that's about. And the good news is we got a good shot of that happening if we can get the politics out of the way. That's, of course, a tall order.
I was watching part of a committee meeting that you were in, and you talked about how if no Republicans are going to be on board with the bill, or if no Democrats are going to be on board with the bill, obviously nothing is going to happen in how tight our Senate is right now. And basically, you're either doing a message bill or maybe raising money for a campaign. And what is it going to take? You mentioned drawing from the four corners in order to come up with these groups, these committees, these individuals and groups of individuals that will actually come up with solutions.
Yeah, the good news is that, in fact, over the last several years, I was lucky enough to fall in with the group of 5 Republicans and 5 Democrats that said, we're tired of just arguing. Let's see if we can't get some things done. We need, for instance, to get broadband into rural parts of our country. We need to improve our roads and our bridges and our airports and our rail lines. Let's put together an infrastructure bill that can actually do that. And so we worked together on a bipartisan basis, agreed amongst ourselves, and convinced our colleagues to go along with it, and we passed it. We've done that time and time again as a little group. We continue to do that. Whether we're able to do that in the future, I can't tell you, because some people have changed. Rob Portman, senator from Ohio, has now retired from the Senate. We're going to miss him. He was part of our little group. But, you know, I didn't go there just to fight. I went to fight and win. And to get something passed into law, as you point out, requires not just Republicans. You have to get some Democrats to go along as well. So you've got to find enough common ground. Each side has to win for something to become law.
I think of the great legislation that has happened during my lifetime and now is participating in my life by happening before I was born, like Social Security, like the civil rights, everything else. Eventually, oh, there was lots of bickering and there were lots of conversations and angst. But somewhere along the line, it's amazing how they came together. They, being we Americans, we came together through our elected representatives and we got big things done. I know we get little things done all the time. It happens. But the big ones, the ones that seemed insurmountable, we used to deal with.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And it means electing congresspeople and senators who want to deal with the big stuff and want to get big things done and are willing to see if they can find common ground with people in the opposition party. Because, by the way, there are people on the other side that feel that there are important things to be done. For instance, making sure we save Social Security. We got a group of us that are working on that. We also got a group working on immigration. Look, we need more workers in Utah, temporary workers, to be able to come here and fill some of the jobs that are right now begging for people to come in and help. So these are things we have to work on together, and we need to elect people that want to get stuff done.
What do you see as the future for making things happen and getting things done? With the Trust Act, with immigration,
Yeah.
What are the odds, especially as we're going into a political season here?
It's a heavy lift right now. There's no question about that. There's a commentator and a writer named Jonah Goldberg. He said both parties are working hard to become the minority party. And what he's basically saying is both parties are appealing to a smaller and smaller slice of their base, a group of people who oftentimes are very angry. And their intent is just to get people angry, but not to actually get anything done. And that's what the Democrats are doing. I could point out some of the things they say. Bernie Sanders is out there fighting for things he knows darn well will never become law. And we have folks in our party as well. I saw Marjorie Taylor Greene this week saying we should divide the country between red states and blue states and separate the country. It's like, what kind of foolishness is that?
Yeah.
We fought a war over that. Abraham Lincoln was the founder of our party. Why would a Republican ever say something as silly as that? But, you know, it's to appeal to a base and to create anger. And when that's the intent, you're not going to solve the big challenges we have. And we have a number of challenges, China being one of them, the debt being one of them, immigration being one of them. We need people to work together to see if we can't take on those problems.
There used to be a time when I could watch the State of the Union address, and I'd be sometimes amused, sometimes I was cheering, sometimes I went, okay, whatever. But I'm cringing lately at some of the things that I see. I'm not talking about everything that comes out of a president's mouth at that address. The reactions within our elected representatives, it is appalling in some cases, on both sides of the aisle.
Yeah, it depends on who's speaking. If it's a Republican president speaking, well, the Democrats are unruly, and our turn when a Democrat president is speaking. I think it hurts the hecklers, their party at least, more than it hurts the president. Yeah. But, you know, the heckler gets a lot of support from their base, if you will, and gets contributions. Oh, I loved it that you called the president a liar. Oh, I'm going to send you more money. And, it diminishes our democracy. I mean, I hope people recognize that we are the light of the world when it comes to freedom and democracy. The world depends on us for leadership. I met with Lech Walesa once in Poland during my presidential campaign, and he said to me, "Where's American leadership? We need American leadership." And he's right. We need leaders and leaders in Congress and the White House and other places to do what's right. And not worry so much about appealing to a narrow slice of their respective parties.
We have so much more to talk about in a very little time. We'll continue our conversation with Senator Mitt Romney right here on KSL. Stay with us. We have just a few more minutes left on the program this morning, and Senator Romney, there's so much to talk about. Earlier in the program, you mentioned the concern about drought and wildfires and so on. And even if we don't, and we mercifully, last season, we skated fairly well on wildfires, although the year before was a different story. But even if it's not in our state, we deal with it from the Northwest, from California, the air quality. How are we doing? And you and I sat on the shore of the Great Salt Lake, did a segment of this program there about a year and a half, 2 years ago, where you were expressing such concern about a lake bed like the Great Salt Lake actually drying up. Where do we stand? How are we doing?
Well, we're finally recognizing we got to change the way we deal with wildfires, because we dealt with them the same way for many, many years. But given the drought of the last 22 years and the prospect that it could continue for a long period of time, I hope it doesn't, but if it does, we're going to have to recognize that we're going to have more wildfires, and they're going to be more devastating. And we lost a lot of life in California in particular, yeah, and a whole town burned away. It's like, okay, guys, if a foreign nation were dropping bombs doing that, we'd be spending billions and doing whatever it took to protect ourselves. Well, Mother Nature is doing that, and we're responding the way we used to. I met with a group earlier in the week that talked about our use of aircraft. And right now, our aircraft that we use are basically all private generated. We get contracts from private companies to provide the aircraft to help put on flame retardant. They're looking to say, okay, do we need a lot more aircraft? And should they be managed by the federal government or by the state governments, and have more aircraft in place to be able to move immediately so we don't have to wait several days before the aircraft arrive. And if the recommendation is more aircraft, then we're going to have to provide the funding to make sure that we're able to protect ourselves. But look, it doesn't make sense to spend $750 billion a year on defense every year and spend a pittance trying to defend against wildfires.
When we talked about the Great Salt Lake, I hadn't really thought about it in terms of the dust. You just think of losing kind of the wildlife, losing the, and this, people laugh when you say this, but it's a big deal in Utah, the brine shrimp industry and so on, and just the effect on the ecosystem out there, but boy, the effect on the air if that lake were to go dry. We're having a banner year, or a real good year right now, thank heaven, but long term, how's that looking?
Well, you are right. If we have more years like this, we'll be just fine, but you can't count on that. And given the global patterns, it would suggest that we're going to have more droughts. We're not going to have as much water as we've had in the past. So we got a plan to say, okay, we got to make sure we put about 500,000 additional acre feet into 500 million acre feet into the Great Salt Lake. And that's going to take conservation, various kinds, conservation by industry, by homeowners, by governments, agriculture. We're all going to have to find a way to see if we can't reduce the amount of water we're taking out and to make sure we get enough water going to the lake. Because you're right, the dust would be devastating to people who live along the Wasatch Front. And with regards to the brine shrimp, we're not eating them, but the birds are. 10 million birds a year stop and get that brine shrimp and then fly on to California and Mexico. We would devastate millions and millions of birds unless we had brine shrimp.
We're almost out of time, but I wanted to look ahead. 2024 is just around the corner now. And what do you anticipate, especially from the Republican point of view? You've had so much experience in that arena. As you look over the playing field, how does it look right now?
Well, I'm not much of a prognosticator when it comes to saying who's going to win the nomination, who's going to win the presidency. Look, I didn't think Donald Trump would become the nominee of the Republican Party back in 2016. He did. And at this stage, I think he's by far the most likely to become our nominee in 2024. I think Joe Biden is by far the most likely to become the Democratic nominee. So if you ask me to say what I think is going to happen, I think it'll be Biden versus Trump. But you know, there's a lot that can happen between now and then. And there are other voices that are popping up. A bunch of Republicans are going to get in. We'll see if some of them or one of them is able to establish a bit of a beachhead and push Donald Trump aside. But time will tell.
Everybody out there who is viewing right now, if I don't ask this question, they'll go, what's wrong with you, Doug? Are you going to run again?
Oh, well, that's a decision I'll be making. Clearly, I want to...
Do you need some help?
No, I appreciate your help on that. But I want to see, you know, what can I do going forward? What's my agenda? What kinds of things can I get through Congress? And is there some meaningful work that I can do with a prospect of success? And that'll be part of my process. I'll have an answer for you sometime, well, before this year's over.
Thank you. Senator Romney, always a pleasure. Thank you for joining us.
Good to be with you.
On Sunday Edition today. And by the way, stay with us, because coming up next here on KSL, it will be music and the spoken word. We'll see you back here next week.